16-year-old Maya Chen lived and breathed piano. Every day after school, while other kids hung out at the mall or scrolled through their phones, she rushed home to practice. Her fingers would dance across the keys for hours, lost in the music that seemed to flow straight from her heart. For 3 years, she had been working on something special. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. If you've never heard it, imagine the most beautiful sweeping piece of music that makes you feel everything all at once. It's the kind of music that can make you cry without knowing why. And Maya had fallen completely in love with it. Her piano teacher, Mrs. Hartwell, was the one who first introduced her to the piece. Mrs. Hartwell wasn't like those strict, scary teachers you see in movies. She was gentle, patient, and always knew exactly what to say when Maya felt frustrated. When Maya hit a difficult section and wanted to give up, Mrs. Hartwell would sit beside her and say things like, "Feel the emotion first. The technical part will follow." She taught Maya that music wasn't just about playing the right notes at the right time. It was about telling a story, sharing a feeling, making people understand something without words. Under Mrs. Hartwell's guidance, Maya had developed her own interpretation of the concerto. She played it with so much emotion that even her parents would stop whatever they were doing just to listen. Her younger brother, who usually complained about her constant practicing, would sometimes crack open her door and sit quietly in the hallway, just taking it in. The regional music competition was everything to Maya. It was held once a year, and students from 12 different schools competed. Winners often got scholarships to prestigious music programs. More than that, it was a chance to perform with a full orchestra, something Maya had dreamed about since she was little. She had watched videos of the competition for years, imagining herself on that stage under those lights, with dozens of musicians supporting her performance. But then, 2 weeks before the competition, everything changed. Mrs. Hartwell got sick. Not just a cold or a flu, but something serious enough that she had to take immediate medical leave. Maya remembered the day she found out. She walked into the music room, excited to show Mrs. Hartwell a breakthrough she'd had with a particularly tricky passage, and found the school's music director waiting instead. "Mrs. Hartwell won't be able to continue with you," he explained, looking genuinely sorry. "But don't worry. We've brought in someone even better to help you prepare." Even better? Maya couldn't imagine anyone better than Mrs. Hartwell, but she tried to stay positive. Maybe this new teacher would be nice too. Then she met Viktor Volkov. He walked into the music room like he owned it, carrying himself with the kind of stiff posture that made him seem taller than he actually was. His hair was gray and slicked back, and he wore an expensive-looking suit that seemed totally out of place in their modest school music room. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself warmly. He simply sat down in the chair usually occupied by Mrs. Hartwell and said, "Play." Maya's hands were shaking a little, nervous about performing for someone new, but she sat at the piano and began. She poured her heart into it just like always. She played the opening passages with all the emotion she'd learned to express, letting the music swell and breathe the way Mrs. Hartwell had taught her. She made it about 2 minutes in before Victor held up his hand sharply. "Stop," he said, his voice cold and flat. Maya's fingers froze above the keys. She looked up at him, confused. "Is that how you've been playing this piece for 3 years?" he asked, and there was something almost mocking in his tone. "Yes," Maya answered quietly. "Mrs. Hartwell and I worked on this interpretation together." Victor made a sound that was almost a laugh, but not the good kind. "This is Rachmaninoff, not a sentimental pop song. What you're doing is childish. It lacks technical precision. It's sloppy and self-indulgent." The words hit Maya like a slap. In 3 years of working with Mrs. Hartwell, she had never heard her playing described that way. Sure, Mrs. Hartwell had given corrections and suggestions, but always with kindness, always with the goal of helping Maya grow. This was different. This felt personal. "But I thought," Maya started to say. "You thought wrong." Victor cut her off. "If you want to compete at a serious level, you need to play seriously. Not like some amateur having feelings at a piano." Over the next week, rehearsals became something Maya dreaded instead of loved. Victor would stop her constantly, criticizing everything. Her tempo was wrong. Her dynamics were too dramatic. Her interpretation was embarrassing. He made her replay sections over and over until they were technically perfect, but felt completely empty. The other students noticed too. The school's small orchestra met 3 times a week to rehearse with Maya, preparing for the competition. They had always enjoyed these sessions, feeding off Maya's passionate energy. But now with Victor in charge, the mood in the room changed completely. During one rehearsal, Victor stopped the entire orchestra mid-piece. "No, no, no," he shouted, making several students jump. "The soloist is rushing. Everyone else is just following her mistakes." Maya felt 30 pairs of eyes on her. Her face burned hot with embarrassment. "From measure 42, Victor commanded, tapping his baton on the music stand with sharp, angry clicks. They started again. Maya tried to play exactly as Victor wanted, technically perfect and emotionally neutral, but it felt so wrong. This wasn't her music anymore. This wasn't the piece she had fallen in love with. After rehearsal, her friend Sophie caught up with her in the hallway. "He's awful," Sophie whispered. "Everyone thinks so. The way he talks to you is not okay." Maya just shrugged, trying to hold back tears. "He's supposed to be this famous pianist or something. Maybe I really have been doing it wrong this whole time." "Don't say that," Sophie said firmly. "I've heard you play 100 times. You're amazing. He's just, I don't know what his problem is, but it's not you." But doubt had already started creeping into Maya's mind. She went home that night and sat at her family's old upright piano, the one she'd learned on as a little kid. She tried to play the Rachmaninoff the way she used to, with all the feeling and passion that made it special. But Victor's voice was in her head now, calling it childish and sloppy. Her mom found her there an hour later, just sitting with her hands in her lap, staring at the keys. "Sweetie, are you okay?" Maya looked up at her mother and the tears finally came. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," she admitted. "I don't know if I was ever actually good, or if Mrs. Hartwell was just being nice to me all these years." Her mother sat down beside her on the piano bench and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Mrs. Hartwell doesn't lie about music. You know that. She tells students the truth because she respects them too much not to." "Then why does Victor think I'm terrible?" Her mother didn't have an answer for that. Nobody did. What Maya didn't know was that things were about to get so much worse. Victor wasn't just reshaping her interpretation of the music. He was about to take away her chance to perform it entirely, and he would do it in the cruelest way possible, in front of everyone she knew, just 5 days before the competition that meant everything to her. 5 days before the competition, Maya walked into the rehearsal room with a small flicker of hope in her chest. She had practiced all weekend, trying to find a balance between Victor's technical demands and her own musical voice. Maybe today would be better. Maybe she could finally show him that she understood what he wanted while still keeping some of herself in the performance. The orchestra was already setting up when she arrived. The conductor, Mr. Phillips, gave her an encouraging nod. He was a kind man who had always supported the student musicians, and Maya could tell he wasn't entirely comfortable with how Victor had been running things either. But Victor was the expert, the famous former concert pianist, and nobody wanted to challenge him. Maya took her seat at the piano and warmed up quietly while the other musicians tuned their instruments. She ran through a few scales, loosening up her fingers. The familiar feel of the keys beneath her hands usually calmed her nerves. But today her stomach was twisted in knots. Victor entered the room exactly at 3 o'clock, as precise with time as he was with music. He didn't greet anyone. He simply walked to the front, picked up his baton, and looked directly at Maya. "We'll run through the entire piece today," he announced to the room. "No stops unless absolutely necessary. The competition is in 5 days, and we need to be performance ready." Maya took a deep breath. She could do this. She had been playing this piece for 3 years. She knew every single note. The orchestra began, and Maya came in at her cue. She tried to play exactly as Victor had instructed, keeping her emotions in check, focusing on precision and timing. Her fingers moved across the keys mechanically, hitting each note with perfect accuracy. But inside, her heart was breaking a little with every measure. This wasn't her music anymore. They made it through the first movement without incident. Maya started to relax slightly. Maybe this would be okay. Maybe Victor would finally approve. But then in the middle of the second movement, right at one of the most beautiful passages in the entire concerto, Victor's baton came down hard on the music stand with a loud crack that made everyone jump. "Stop," he shouted. The music fell apart as instruments trailed off one by one. The sudden silence in the room was heavy and uncomfortable. Maya's hands hovered over the keys, her heart pounding. Victor set down his baton slowly and deliberately. Then he turned to face the entire orchestra, his expression cold and hard. "This is not working," he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the room. "What I'm hearing is not representative of this school's standards. It's not what I'm willing to put my name behind." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. Was he talking about the whole orchestra? Or was he talking about her? She got her answer a moment later. "The soloist," Victor continued, looking straight at her now, "lacks the maturity and technical skill required for this piece. I've tried to work with what I was given, but there's only so much that can be done in 2 weeks." Maya couldn't breathe. She was aware of every single person in that room staring at her. Some looked shocked. Some looked sympathetic. Some just looked down at their instruments, too uncomfortable to watch. "Therefore," Victor said, turning to address the whole orchestra again, "I'm making a change. Derek Mansfield will perform the Rachmaninoff at the competition." The words didn't make sense at first. Maya heard them, but her brain couldn't process what they meant. Derek Mansfield was a senior, a piano student who played with technical precision but had all the emotional depth of a calculator. He was good at hitting the right notes at the right time, but his performances never made anyone feel anything. Derek himself looked surprised, but there was something else in his expression too. Smugness, pride. He stood up from where he'd been sitting with the other students who weren't currently playing, and walked toward the piano. Toward her piano. "Maya, you can move," Victor said dismissively, as if she were a piece of furniture in the way. Somehow Maya's legs managed to work. She stood up from the piano bench, her movements stiff and robotic. She felt like she was watching herself from outside her body, like this was happening to someone else. Derek slid onto the bench where she'd just been sitting, where she'd sat dozens of times over the past 3 years, dreaming of this competition. "Maya will perform a solo piece instead," Victor announced to the room, "something more appropriate to her current skill level. A Mozart sonata, perhaps. Something from the junior division." The junior division. That was for middle schoolers and younger high school students. Maya had aged out of it 2 years ago. More than that, she had mastered the Mozart sonatas when she was 12. Playing one now would be like asking a high school athlete to compete in an elementary school race. It was humiliating, and Victor knew it. "From the top," Victor said to the orchestra, raising his baton again as if nothing significant had just happened, as if he hadn't just destroyed 3 years of Maya's work in front of 30 people. Maya stood there for a moment, frozen. Then, on shaky legs, she walked to the side of the room and sat down in one of the empty chairs. She watched Derek place his hands on the keys. Her keys. He started to play her piece. Technically, he was perfect. Every note was exactly right. The tempo was precise. The dynamics were controlled, but it was empty, lifeless. It sounded like a very advanced computer program playing the piano, not a human being expressing something real. And Victor loved it. "Yes," Victor said, nodding with approval. "This is what I've been trying to achieve. Do you hear that, everyone? This is proper Rachmaninoff." Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here, not in front of everyone." She sat perfectly still, her hands clenched in her lap so tightly that her fingernails dug into her palms. Her friend Sophie, who played violin in the orchestra, kept glancing over at her with worried eyes. But there was nothing Sophie could do, nothing anyone could do. After rehearsal finally ended, Maya gathered her things as quickly as possible. She just wanted to get out of there, to go somewhere private where she could fall apart without an audience. But as she headed for the door, she heard footsteps behind her. "Hey Maya, no hard feelings, right?" It was Derek with that same smug expression on his face. "I know you worked hard on this, but Victor knows what he's doing. He used to perform at Carnegie Hall, you know." Maya looked at him, and for a moment she couldn't find any words. Then she said quietly, "Yeah, no hard feelings, because what else could she say?" It wasn't Derek's fault that Victor had chosen him, but that didn't make it hurt any less. She made it to her car before the tears started. Sitting in the driver's seat, she let herself cry, big heaving sobs that shook her whole body. 3 years. 3 years of work, of practice, of pouring her heart into this piece, and Victor had taken it away in less than 2 weeks. That night her parents found out what had happened when her little brother mentioned it at dinner. "Wait, you're not playing the Rachmaninoff anymore?" her dad asked, setting down his fork. Maya shook her head, staring at her plate. "Why not?" her mother demanded. "You've been preparing that piece for 3 years. The competition is in 5 days. Victor doesn't think I'm good enough, Maya said simply. He's having Derek play it instead. Her parents were furious. Her father called the school principal that night, arguing that this was unfair, that you can't change performers 5 days before a major competition. Her mother drafted an email to the school board. They were ready to fight for her, but the next day the principal called back. Viktor Volkov had an impressive resume, he explained. He'd performed with major orchestras around the world. He'd taught at prestigious music schools. His professional judgment had to be respected. And besides, Maya was still competing. She was just playing a different piece now, a piece for children. Maya's mother hung up the phone and looked at her daughter with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. That night, Maya sat at her family's piano but couldn't bring herself to play. She just sat there, her hands resting on the closed key cover, feeling more defeated than she'd ever felt in her life. The piano that had always been her safe place, her joy, now just reminded her of everything she'd lost. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. Are you okay? I'm here if you need to talk, Maya typed back. I don't know if I even want to go to the competition anymore, but deep down, even through all the pain and humiliation, a tiny spark of something else was beginning to form. It wasn't hope exactly. It was something harder, something that tasted like anger and determination mixed together. She wasn't sure what she was going to do with that feeling yet. But she was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't quite ready to give up. The next morning, Maya woke up feeling numb. She went through the motions of getting ready for school, brushing her teeth, getting dressed, but everything felt distant and unreal. Her mother kept giving her concerned looks over breakfast, but Maya just picked at her food and said she was fine. She wasn't fine, but what else could she say? At school, word had spread fast. A few people gave her sympathetic looks in the hallway. Others pretended they hadn't heard anything. Derek walked past her with his chest puffed out, already acting like a star. Maya kept her head down and focused on getting through the day. At lunch, Sophie found her sitting alone in the library. Okay, that's it, Sophie said, dropping her lunch bag on the table with a thud. I'm not letting you disappear like this. I'm not disappearing, Maya said quietly. I don't know what I am. Sophie sat down across from her, her eyes fierce with determination. You're talented, that's what you are. And what Victor did to you was wrong. Everyone knows it. Everyone except the people who actually matter, Maya replied. The principal doesn't care. Victor's got some fancy reputation, so his word is law. So what? Sophie leaned forward. Are you just going to let him win? Are you really going to show up at that competition and play some baby Mozart piece like a trained monkey, while Derek gets to perform your concerto? Maya felt a flash of anger at the word your, because that was exactly how she thought of it. Her concerto, her piece, the one she'd lived with for 3 years. What choice do I have? Sophie was quiet for a moment, then a strange look crossed her face. Actually, you might have more choices than you think. What do you mean? The competition has different categories, right? Junior division, senior division, but there's also an open performance category. I remember because my cousin competed in it 2 years ago. It's for original compositions or unique arrangements. Students can perform whatever they want as long as it's their own work. Maya frowned. I don't have an original composition. I've never written my own music before, so write one now, Sophie said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. You've got 4 days. 4 days to write and learn an entire piece? That's impossible, is it? Sophie challenged. Or is it just hard? Because I've watched you practice 6 hours a day for 3 years. If anyone can do impossible things, it's you. Maya felt something shift inside her. That tiny spark from last night was growing warmer. Even if I could write something, where would I practice? Victor's watching my every move. If he found out I was working on something else, he'd probably find a way to stop me from competing entirely. Sophie's eyes lit up. My garage. My dad soundproofed it last year when he was going through his garage band phase. Nobody can hear anything from outside. You could practice there every night after Victor's rehearsals. Your parents would be okay with that? Are you kidding? My mom was ready to march down to the school and yell at Victor herself when I told her what happened. She'd probably help you compose the piece if she could. For the first time in 2 days, Maya felt something other than despair. It was a wild idea. Reckless, even. Write an original composition in 4 days. Learn it well enough to perform in front of judges and an audience and do it all in secret. but the alternative was showing up to that competition, playing a piece she'd mastered when she was 12, and watching Derek perform her Rachmaninoff with all the emotion of a robot reading a grocery list. "Okay," Maya said slowly. "Let's do it." Sophie actually squealed with excitement, earning them a sharp look from the librarian. "Yes, okay, come over tonight. We'll figure this out." That afternoon, Maya went through Victor's rehearsal like she was on autopilot. He'd assigned her a Mozart sonata, and she played it perfectly because of course she did. She could play it in her sleep. Victor nodded his approval, which felt like nothing at all. Then she sat and watched him work with Derek on the Rachmaninoff, each perfectly executed but soulless note like a knife twisting in her gut. But now, instead of just feeling pain, she was channeling it into something else. She was thinking, planning. After rehearsal, she texted her mom that she was going to Sophie's house to study. It wasn't exactly a lie. She was going to study, just not math or history. Sophie's garage was perfect. Her dad really had soundproofed it well, with foam panels covering the walls and a thick door that sealed tight. In the center of the space sat an old upright piano that Sophie's grandmother had given them. "It's not the best," Sophie apologized, "but it's in tune." "It's perfect," Maya said, running her fingers over the keys. And it was perfect because it was hers for the next 4 nights, a space where Victor couldn't reach her, couldn't criticize her, couldn't take anything else away from her. "So," Sophie said, pulling up a chair, "where do you start?" Maya sat down at the piano and closed her eyes. I think I start with how I'm feeling right now." She pressed a few keys, letting the sound guide her. The notes that came out were dark and heavy, matching the weight she'd been carrying since Victor took her solo away. She played with that feeling for a while, letting the music express the anger and hurt she'd been holding inside. Then something interesting happened. Her fingers found their way to a passage from the Rachmaninoff, the concerto that had been taken from her. But instead of playing it the way it was written, she twisted it, changed it, made it her own. She added her own melody on top, something that spoke to her story. "Whoa," Sophie breathed. "That's beautiful." Maya kept playing, losing herself in the music. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about Victor's criticism or trying to play what someone else wanted her to play. She was just creating. The music flowed out of her like it had been waiting there all along, just needing permission to exist. She worked for 3 hours that first night, with Sophie sitting quietly nearby, occasionally offering encouragement or bringing her water. By the time Maya had to go home, she had the skeleton of something. It wasn't finished, not even close, but it was real. It was hers. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm. Maya would go to school, endure Victor's rehearsals where she played the simple Mozart piece over and over, and then escape to Sophie's garage where her real work happened. Each night her composition grew stronger, more complete. She called it substitution. The title felt right. She'd been substituted, replaced, deemed not good enough. But this piece was her response to that. It told the story of someone who'd been pushed aside, who'd had their voice taken away, but who refused to stay silent. The music started dark and heavy, reflecting the pain of rejection. Then it moved through anger with harsh, powerful chords that made the piano shake. But it didn't stay in the darkness. Slowly, gradually, the melody began to climb upward, finding hope and strength. The final section was triumphant, not in a loud, showy way, but in a quiet, determined way that said, "I'm still here. You tried to break me, but I'm still here." She incorporated elements of the Rachmaninoff throughout, weaving them into her own composition like threads of her history, her journey with that piece. But she made them hers, transforming them into something new. By the 3rd night, Sophie's parents had started coming out to listen. Her mom sat on an old couch in the corner of the garage, tears streaming down her face as Maya played. "That's extraordinary," she told Maya during a break. "I've never heard anything like it." "You really think it's good?" Maya asked, suddenly feeling vulnerable. It was one thing to pour your heart into music in a soundproof garage with your best friend. It was another thing to think about performing it in front of hundreds of people. "Good?" Sophie's dad shook his head. "Kiddo, it's way better than good. It's honest. And that's rarer than you might think." On the 4th night, the night before the competition, Maya played through the entire piece 3 times without stopping. Her fingers knew every note. More than that, her heart knew every emotion. This piece was as much a part of her as breathing. "Are you scared?" Sophie asked as they sat on the garage floor afterward. Exhausted but exhilarated. Terrified, Maya admitted. Victor doesn't even know I'm doing this. When I walk onto that stage tomorrow, he's going to be furious. Let him be furious, Sophie said fiercely. He took something from you. Now you're taking something back. Maya pulled out her phone and looked at the competition schedule she'd screenshot earlier. The open performance category was scheduled after the senior division performances, which meant she'd have to sit through Derek playing her Rachmaninoff first. She'd have to watch Victor's triumph before she could have her moment. I can do this, she said out loud, trying to convince herself. You can do this, Sophie echoed, and I'll be right there in the audience cheering louder than anyone else. That night, Maya barely slept. She ran through the piece in her mind, her fingers moving on invisible keys. Tomorrow, everything would change. One way or another, after tomorrow, nothing would be the same. She just hoped she was ready for it. The morning of the competition, Maya woke up before her alarm went off. Her stomach was doing flips and her hands were shaking slightly. She looked at them, willing them to be steady. These hands had played piano for 10 years. They'd practiced substitution hundreds of times over the past 4 days. They could do this. Her mother made her favorite breakfast, pancakes with strawberries, but Maya could barely eat. Her little brother kept talking about some video game, which was actually helpful because it kept things feeling normal. Her dad gave her a long hug before she left. Whatever happens today, he said, we're proud of you. You know that, right? Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. If she started talking about feelings right now, she might cry, and she needed to save all her emotions for the piano. The competition was being held at Riverside Concert Hall, a beautiful old building downtown with red velvet seats and chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Maya had performed here once before, 2 years ago, and remembered feeling awestruck by the space. Today, walking in with her parents and Sophie, she felt something different. Determination. The junior division performances were first. Maya had to play her Mozart sonata at 10:30. She checked in at the registration desk and the coordinator gave her a warm smile. Maya Chen, right? I remember you from 2 years ago. You played beautifully then. Good luck today. Maya smiled back, feeling a little bit of the woman's encouragement seep into her nervous heart. She found a seat in the performer's waiting area and tried to focus on her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, just like Mrs. Hartwell had taught her when she got nervous. Mrs. Hartwell. Maya wondered if her teacher knew what had happened, if anyone had told her about Victor's decision. She made a mental note to visit Mrs. Hartwell after the competition, no matter how today went. When her name was called for the junior division, Maya walked onto that big stage with her head held high. The stage lights were bright and warm. The audience was a dark sea of faces beyond the light. Somewhere out there, her parents and Sophie were watching. And somewhere out there, Victor was watching too. She sat at the grand piano, adjusted the bench slightly, and placed her hands on the keys. Then she played the Mozart sonata exactly as Victor had trained her to play it. Technically perfect. Every note precise, every tempo marking followed to the letter. She played it like a machine because that's what Victor wanted, and she needed him to believe she'd been broken. The audience applauded politely when she finished. It was fine. It was forgettable. It was exactly what Victor expected. Maya walked off stage and returned to the waiting area. Her performance was over as far as Victor knew. Now all she had to do was wait for the senior division, watch Derek perform, and then make her move. The next 2 hours felt like the longest of her life. She watched other students perform, some nervous, some confident, all of them pouring their hearts into their music. Finally, it was time for the senior division. Derek was the third performer. Maya forced herself to go into the auditorium and find a seat near the back. She needed to watch this even though it was going to hurt. Sophie slid into the seat next to her and squeezed her hand. You okay? Sophie whispered. I will be, Maya whispered back. Then Derek walked onto the stage and the orchestra took their positions. Maya spotted Victor standing off to the side, his posture rigid and proud. This was his moment. His student playing his way. The orchestra began and Derek came in exactly on cue. Maya had to admit he was technically flawless. Every single note was perfect. The timing was precise. The dynamics were exactly as written in the sheet music. If you closed your eyes and just listened to the notes themselves, you might think it was a great performance. But if you listened with your heart, If you tried to feel what the music was saying, there was nothing there. It was empty. Beautiful notes arranged perfectly, but with no soul behind them. No story, no emotion. It was like looking at a photograph of a sunset instead of actually watching the sun go down and feeling the day end. The audience applauded when Derek finished. It was enthusiastic applause because, technically, he'd done everything right. Victor was beaming. He actually smiled, something Maya had never seen him do before. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd proven that his way, his rigid, emotionless approach to music, was the right way. Maya felt that spark inside her burst into a flame. Derek left the stage, looking proud and satisfied. The next two performers went. Maya barely registered them. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Sophie kept glancing over at her, looking worried. Finally, the senior division ended. The judges made some notes. The coordinator stood up to announce a short break before the final category. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now take a 15-minute intermission before our open performance category begins. This category features original compositions and unique arrangements by our talented students. Maya stood up and Sophie grabbed her arm. "This is it," Sophie said. "Are you ready?" "I have no idea," Maya admitted. "But I'm doing it anyway." She made her way backstage, her legs feeling shaky. The coordinator was checking her list of performers and Maya approached her. "Hi, I'm Maya Chen. I'm registered for the open performance category." The coordinator checked her clipboard and smiled. "Oh yes, here you are. I didn't realize you were doing 2 performances today. That's ambitious." "Just trying to make the most of the opportunity," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. She waited in the wings while the first 2 open category performers went on. One girl performed a jazz arrangement she'd written. One boy played a classical guitar piece he'd composed. Both were good, both were creative. Maya's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Then she heard it, her name being called. Next we have Maya Chen performing an original composition titled Substitution. Maya walked onto that stage for the second time that day, but this time everything felt different. This time she wasn't performing for Victor. She wasn't performing to meet anyone else's standards. She was performing for herself and for every person who'd ever been told they weren't good enough. She sat at the piano and took a moment to breathe. Then she looked out into the audience and her eyes found Victor. He was sitting in the middle section and his expression was one of complete confusion. He leaned over to say something to the person next to him, probably asking what was happening. Maya smiled slightly. Then she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The piece started dark and heavy, just like she'd composed it. The opening notes were full of pain and anger, the sound of someone having their dreams crushed. She saw some people in the audience lean forward, surprised by the intensity. This wasn't what they'd heard from her in the junior division. This was something completely different. Maya poured everything into those keys. Every moment of humiliation from the past 2 weeks. Every cruel word Victor had said. Every night she'd cried in frustration. But also every hour she'd spent in Sophie's garage reclaiming her voice. Every moment of strength she'd found inside herself. The music moved through its angry phase with harsh chords that rang through the concert hall. Then gradually it began to change. The melody started to climb, to reach for something higher. Hope began to weave itself through the darkness. And then she brought in the Rachmaninoff. Not copied, not stolen, but transformed. She took those familiar passages and made them hers, weaving them into her story. The concerto she'd loved for 3 years, the one Victor had taken from her, was now part of something new. Something he couldn't control. Maya could feel the audience reacting. The usual polite silence had been replaced by something electric. People were completely still, barely breathing, caught up in the story the music was telling. Some had their hands over their mouths, some had tears in their eyes. She reached the final section, the triumphant part where the melody soared. This wasn't triumph in a loud, flashy way. It was quiet strength. It was the sound of someone who'd been knocked down but chose to stand back up. It was the sound of a voice that refused to be silenced. As Maya played the final notes, she looked up and saw Victor. He was standing now, his face completely pale, his expression frozen in shock. His mouth was slightly open. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. The last note faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the entire audience exploded into applause. Not polite applause, not obligatory applause, real thunderous applause. People were standing, clapping over their heads. Someone in the back shouted, "Bravo!" Maya stood up from the piano bench, her legs wobbling slightly. She took a bow and the applause grew even louder. She saw her parents in the audience, both crying and clapping. She saw Sophie jumping up and down, screaming with joy. And she saw Victor pushing his way toward the aisle, stumbling slightly, his hand pressed against his chest like he couldn't breathe. He was leaving, running away. And as he reached the exit door, several people around him were staring, whispering, pointing. Maya didn't understand what was happening. She'd expected Victor to be angry, but this was something else. He looked devastated, destroyed. What she didn't know yet was that her music had revealed something Victor had been hiding for 20 years. Something he'd buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it himself. And tomorrow, when a video of her performance started spreading across the internet, everyone would understand why Victor had run from that auditorium like he was being chased by his own past. Maya stood backstage after her performance, still shaking from adrenaline. Sophie found her first, throwing her arms around her friend and screaming with excitement. "That was incredible. Maya, that was absolutely incredible." Everyone was crying. "Did you see their faces?" Before Maya could respond, her parents rushed backstage, both talking at once. Her mother was wiping tears from her cheeks. Her father kept saying, "I can't believe it," over and over. Even her little brother looked impressed, which was saying something. "Where did that come from?" her mother asked. "When did you write that?" "The past 4 days," Maya admitted. "In Sophie's garage. We kept it secret because I knew Victor would try to stop me if he found out." Her father shook his head in amazement. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard you play. And I've heard you play a lot." Other people started approaching, wanting to congratulate her. Parents of other students. "Fellow performers?" The coordinator came over with a huge smile and told her the judges were incredibly impressed. Maya felt like she was floating, like none of this could possibly be real. But in the back of her mind, she kept thinking about Victor's face. The way he'd looked at her during that performance. The way he'd stumbled out of the auditorium like he was in pain. It didn't make sense. An older woman approached Maya, dressed professionally with a badge that read National Youth Orchestra. She introduced herself as Catherine Rodriguez, a talent scout. "I recorded your performance," Catherine said, showing Maya her phone. "I hope that's all right. I work with young musicians across the country, and I have to say what you did up there was extraordinary, not just technically but emotionally. You told a story." Maya felt her cheeks flush. "Thank you. That means a lot. I'd like to talk to you about some opportunities," Catherine continued, handing Maya a business card. "The National Youth Orchestra has a summer program, and we also work with several music conservatories. I think you have real potential, and I'd love to discuss this further with you and your parents." Maya took the card with trembling hands. This was the kind of opportunity she'd dreamed about. The kind of thing winning this competition was supposed to lead to. Except she hadn't won anything. She'd just performed. And somehow that had been enough. The award ceremony happened an hour later. Derek won first place in the senior division, which was expected. His technical perfection had earned him high marks from the judges. When he accepted his trophy, he looked pleased but not surprised. Victor wasn't there to see it. He still hadn't come back to the auditorium. Maya won first place in the open performance category. When they called her name, the applause was deafening. She walked up to accept her medal and small trophy, feeling surreal about the whole thing. The head judge, an elderly man who'd been teaching music for 40 years, leaned in to whisper to her. "That composition of yours, young lady, it reminded me of something. A piece I heard many years ago that never got the recognition it deserved. You have a gift for emotional truth in music. Don't ever let anyone take that away from you." Maya thanked him, not fully understanding what he meant but feeling the weight of his words anyway. That evening, Sophie posted the video Catherine had recorded to social media. She tagged it with Maya's name and the title Substitution. Neither of them expected what happened next. By the next morning, the video had been viewed 50,000 times. By the afternoon, it was at 200,000. People were sharing it, commenting on it, talking about the raw emotion in Maya's playing. Music teachers were using it as an example in their classes. Professional musicians were praising it online. But something else was happening too. Older musicians, people who'd been in the classical music world for decades, started commenting with a strange consistency. They kept saying things like, "This reminds me of Victor Volkov's old style," and Does anyone else hear echoes of that piece Volkov wrote before he stopped performing? Maya was reading through the comments with Sophie when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Maya Chen? The voice was unfamiliar, older, with a slight accent. My name is Dr. Patricia Wong. I'm a music historian and I've spent years studying the work of Viktor Volkov. I just watched your performance and I needed to speak with you. Do you have a few minutes? Maya put the phone on speaker so Sophie could hear. Sure. What's this about? Your piece, Substitution, Dr. Wong began. It incorporates elements from Rachmaninoff, yes, but it also contains passages that are strikingly similar to a composition Viktor Volkov wrote 23 years ago. A piece called The Replacement. He only performed it once at a major competition in Vienna. The judges rejected it, called it too emotional, too raw, not refined enough. It destroyed his performing career. He never played publicly again after that. Maya felt her stomach drop. I've never heard that piece. I didn't know it existed. I believe you, Dr. Wong said gently. That's what makes this so remarkable. Somehow, in creating your own response to being replaced and rejected, you tapped into the same emotional truth that Victor was trying to express all those years ago, except you succeeded where he failed. You found the balance between emotion and technique. You did what he couldn't do. After hanging up, Maya and Sophie just stared at each other. That's why he ran, Sophie whispered. You weren't just performing. You were holding up a mirror to his biggest failure. You were showing him what he could have been if he hadn't let bitterness consume him. Maya felt a complicated mix of emotions. Triumph, yes, but also something like sadness. Victor had been cruel to her, had tried to break her spirit. But now she understood that he'd been broken first, and he'd spent 20 years trying to break everyone else rather than heal himself. 3 days later, Maya received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with just 2 words written in elegant handwriting. You understood. She knew immediately it was from Victor. She never saw him again. The school announced he'd resigned from his substitute position for personal reasons. Some students said they'd seen him at the airport with luggage, leaving town. Derek claimed Victor had told him he was going back to Europe. Nobody knew for sure, but Maya kept that letter. She put it in a frame and hung it in her room, a reminder that hurt people, but also that healing is possible, even if it's complicated. The video of her performance eventually got over 5 million views. Catherine Rodriguez followed through on her promise, and Maya was accepted into a prestigious summer program with the National Youth Orchestra. More importantly, Mrs. Hartwell recovered and came back to teaching. When she heard what had happened, she cried and told Maya how proud she was. You found your own voice, Mrs. Hartwell said during their reunion. That's the hardest thing for any artist to do, and you did it under the worst circumstances imaginable. Maya continued playing piano, of course. She went on to perform Substitution several more times at different venues, and each time people responded with the same emotional intensity. She also went back to the Rachmaninoff, finally getting to perform it with an orchestra at a regional event 6 months later. This time she played it her way, with all the emotion and passion she'd originally brought to it. The audience loved it. Derek, interestingly enough, changed his playing style after that competition. He started trying to add more feeling to his performances, though it didn't come naturally to him. Maya ran into him once at a music festival and he actually apologized. I didn't get it before, he admitted. I thought music was just about hitting the right notes. But watching what you did, seeing how people reacted, I realized I was missing the whole point. Maya appreciated the apology, though she and Derek never became friends. Some things you just can't come back from. Years later, when Maya was in college studying music composition, she learned more about Victor's story. She discovered recordings of The Replacement, the piece he'd written all those years ago. Listening to it, she could hear what Dr. Wong had meant. There were similarities not in the notes themselves, but in the emotional journey. Victor had been trying to express something real and true, and the judges of his time had rejected it for being too much, too raw. The tragedy was that he'd let that rejection poison him. Instead of continuing to create, to grow, to find his voice, he'd spent 20 years trying to make everyone else play the way the judges had wanted. He'd tried to kill in others what had been killed in him. Maya refused to let that be her story. She continued composing, continued performing, continued pouring her heart into music. Some people loved her work. Some didn't get it, and that was okay. She'd learned that you can't make everyone understand, and that's not the point anyway. The point is to be true to yourself, to keep creating even when it's hard, even when people try to break you down. The point is to understand that your voice matters, that your truth matters even if someone else doesn't see it. Maya kept Victor's letter in her studio, where she could see it while she worked. You understood. 2 words that contained so much pain, so much regret, and maybe, just maybe, a small seed of hope that understanding might be the first step toward healing. She never forgot what Victor tried to do to her. But she also never forgot what she'd learned from the experience, that no one else gets to define your worth. That sometimes the people who try to diminish you are really just revealing their own wounds, and that the best response to someone trying to silence you is not revenge but simply continuing to sing your own song, louder and more true than ever before.